Rupert Murdoch, switching gears, tweeted this, praising you and your wife. I'll put it up on the screen, clearly taking a swipe at President Obama. Ben and Candy Carson, terrific. What about a real black president who can properly address the racial divide and much else? That's a pretty shocking statement. He's now apologized in effect, but that was pretty ugly.
Well, I know Rupert Murdoch. He's not a racist by any stretch of the imagination. He's just expressing his opinion. I think it's much to do about nothing.
But he's suggesting that President Obama is not a real black president. At least he did in that initial.
Everybody's entitled to their opinion. I believe what he was making reference to was the fact that here was a man who is a black president that the black community was very excited about, who came in and whose policies have not really elevated the black community, has not been beneficial. There's more unemployment, more poverty, and I believe that's what he was really referring to.
You believe the president is a real black president, though, right?
I wouldn't even get into such a conversation.
It's a simple question. Is President Obama a real black president?
Well, he's the president and he's black.
So he's a real black president.
Again, you know, we're dealing with semantics. As you know, I'm the last person who wants to play around with semantics and political correctness. You know, Rupert Murdoch said what he said. He apologized because a lot of people took it the wrong way. I think there's so many more important issues to deal with.
Because there's a whole history of these kinds of accusations, as you well know, of President Obama. Was he born? Do you believe he was born in the United States?
I do believe that.
Do you believe he's a Christian?
He says he is.
But I know he says he is, but do you believe he is?
I have to take him at his word.
Why can't you just say he's a Christian? If he goes to church, he believes in Christ, why can't you just simply say he's a Christian?
I can simply say that I'll take him at his word.
Okay. I also want you to clarify the issue of a Muslim president in the United States, because there's been a lot of uproar about that. There should be no religious qualifications to becoming president of the United States.
I agree. I have no disagreement with that. And
so explain why you said you don't think there should be a Muslim president.
If you heard the whole conversation, I said previous to that anybody from any background, religious or otherwise, who accepts the values of America and is willing to put our Constitution above their beliefs is fine with me. And then it continued in another vein, bringing up somebody who perhaps did not fit into that category. Well, if they don't fit into that category because of their belief system, and in this case, the assumption being that they are Islamic believers, part of the Islamic belief system, which is a lifestyle, not just a simple religion, includes Sharia. Now, there are components of Sharia that will place any religion that is not the same as theirs in a category of people they call the kafir. You can do anything you want to those people, and you can put them into an inferior position. You can also put women into an inferior position. You can also reap all kinds of horrible things upon homosexuals, upon divorcees or people caught in adultery and a host of other things. These things are not compatible with our Constitution. If somebody can show me how they are compatible, I'll change my mind.
But if a Muslim American citizen says he or she wants to honor the Constitution, obey the Constitution,
then they fit into the previous category where I said I have any problem.
So then a Muslim could be the president of the United States.
Of course they could.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. Right. Obviously, if you swear you're going to honor and obey the Constitution, whatever religion you are, or if you're an atheist for that matter,
sure,
you can become president of the United States. Let's get to some other issues. Jeb Bush, the Republican presidential candidate, he has just said he opposes reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act. Do you agree with him?
Well, you know, he probably, I would like to understand his rationale for that. But of course I want, you know, the Voting Rights Act to be protected. And, you know, whether we still need it or not, whether we've outgrown the need for it, it's questionable. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't. But I wouldn't jeopardize it.
Well, he says, in contrast to what Hillary Clinton says, that Voting Rights Act was written in an earlier, a few generations ago, and those kinds of regulations that existed then to make sure some of the southern states honor voting rights for African Americans, for example. He says those regulations are no longer needed because the country has moved forward.
And he may well be right, but I don't see the disadvantage in maintaining the right.
So you're open to reauthorizing it as well?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other issues. The debt ceiling, as you know, in early November, it's got to be raised, otherwise the U.S. will fail to pay what it already has accumulated as far as its financial obligations.
Sure.
What would you do about that if you were President of the United States?
Yeah, but if we keep raising it, it's sort of like, okay, if you've reached the limit for your fourth credit card, tell you what, why don't we get a fifth credit card? And we keep, that's not solving the problem. So, no, I am not in favor of continually raising the debt ceiling.
But something's going to happen in November, and everyone agrees the U.S. has got to do something about reducing the annual deficit, reducing the national debt. But there are debts that the United States already has accumulated that have to be repaid, otherwise the U.S. goes into default.
Yeah, well, there may be other places where we should be thinking about, getting rid of some of our expense. We have 4.1 million federal employees. Do we really need 4.1 million federal employees? We have 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies. Do we really need that? I mean, we need to be looking at other things. I know that Nancy Pelosi said, if you cut one penny, the whole system will collapse. You know what I say about that? It's not true.
No, I think a lot of people agree there's a lot of waste, fraud, there's corruption. You can cut the federal government. A lot of jobs can be eliminated. You can cut spending. I think almost everyone agrees with that. But in the short term, you got to deal in early November with raising that debt ceiling. And people are wondering, if you were president, what would you tell members of Congress to do?
I would probably make a deal if I were suddenly president now, because it's too late to do what we need to do so that we don't have to raise it.
Because between now and November, you're not going to cut all that spending.
Right. But I would say, if we raise it now, it is on the stipulation, and I would say, let's take all of those different agencies, you're going to cut your budget by 3 or 4%.
And in other words, raise it now, but make sure that within a year, all that spending is reduced so that the deficit goes down,
right,
down.
Because we don't want to keep having this problem.
Well, I think you've answered that question now. Let's talk about your flat tax. What would it be? You want a flat tax across the board. You've suggested in the past tithing, as in the Bible, 10% for everyone, no matter what your income.
Right. The tithing issue is proportionality, not necessarily to say that it would be 10%. 10% is an easy number to work with because people can understand the numbers. But it has to apply to everyone equally. It would probably be closer to 15%. There would be no deductions and no exemptions, because the minute that you put those in, people start migrating toward them. And some people have more ability to migrate than others do, so it makes it unfair. And I know that there are some people who say it's not fair because, the guy who made $10 billion and put in $1 billion, he's still got $9 billion left. We got to take more of his money. Well, that's socialism. And what made America great was just the opposite attitude. We would say, that guy put $1 billion in, let's make the environment even more friendly so next year he can put $2 billion
Because
in.
the argument that some economists make, serious economists, not partisan economists, is if you do that 10% or 15% flat tax, it's going to bring in less revenue into the federal treasury, and as a result, that deficit will go up, up, and up.
It may not bring in quite as much as we're bringing in now, but recognize that it will also be done in conjunction with some responsible reductions.
Let's talk about national security, foreign policy while I have you. Doctors Without Borders, that medical facility, and you're a doctor. You saw it was hit. A lot of people were killed, doctors, nurses, patients, staff members. The president did this extraordinary thing yesterday. He called up the head of Doctors Without Borders to formally apologize on behalf of the United States. Would you have done that?
Doctors Without Borders are incredibly brave people, and they have my admiration and sympathy for what happened. Having said that, recognize that they are working in a very dangerous place. And when you work in a very dangerous place, you cannot expect that you're going to do so without safety. And I think they all understand that when they go into those situations. In terms of what actually happened there, I believe that we're still peeling back the layers. We're getting lots of different stories. So I probably wouldn't have done that until I had the full story.
You wouldn't have called to apologize?
Not until I had the full story.
There's going to be a U.S. investigation, a military investigation, a NATO investigation, an Afghan government investigation, but Doctors Without Borders wants an international UN investigation as well. Should the U.S. cooperate with an outside UN international investigation?
As long as we were conducting our own investigations, I would have no difficulty with that.
The whole issue of the war in Afghanistan, yesterday was the 14th anniversary of the start of the U.S. war. October 7, 2001, the U.S. began airstrikes in Afghanistan to destroy the Taliban, al-Qaeda. That war still continues to this very day. Nearly 10,000 U.S. troops are still in Afghanistan. How much longer do you think the U.S. should remain there, spending tens of billions of dollars to train Afghan troops, many of whom simply run away at the first sign of trouble?
Well, recognize that Afghanistan is sort of a wild place. Many people have gone in and tried to tame it, and they've all had the same result. And they don't have a real central governing structure. They have 300 tribal leaders. Now, some of the northern ones, the Northern Alliance, have been pretty dependable, and we've been able to work with them in the past. As you probably know, I have never really been for putting a bunch of our troops in Afghanistan. Doesn't mean I don't support a vigorous response to terrorism. But I believe that we have other mechanisms, special forces, drones, etc., that can render us very effective in taking care of those people. I don't have any problem with us going after Osama bin Laden in Pakistan and maybe using Afghanistan as a launching pad. But we do not necessarily gain anything from putting a lot of our troops in harm's way.
So when President Obama says those 10,000 who are still there, bring them all back by the end of next year, maybe 1,000 remaining in Afghanistan, some to protect the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. On that specific narrow issue, you're with him?
Well, no, I'm not necessarily with them because they're there now and they're playing a role now. I would not have had them there in the first place, but they are there and we have to deal with reality. It's just like I wasn't in favor of going into Iraq, but we went into there, we destabilized the situation, and we had an obligation to stay there and ensure that it remained stable throughout time, and we did not do that, and it resulted in the creation of ISIS and a lot of instability.
So going into Iraq, going into Afghanistan, just want to be precise, you say both of those were, when they happened in 2001 and 2003, were major blunders.
I was not for them, but I was for action. There's a difference.
What would you do about the Russian involvement in Syria right now?
Well, you need to recognize that Vladimir Putin has great ambitions, great expansionist ambitions. And he was very disappointed when the Soviet Union dissolved. He wants to reestablish the influence in the Middle East. He already has substantial ties in the Middle East. In the class of 1968 at Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow, Mahmoud Abbas was one of those members of that class, and so was Khomeini, Ali Khomeini. They were classmates. And that's when they first established relationships with a young Vladimir Putin. This was long-standing. And now he's finding a friendly face in Assad, an Assad regime, who's also being supported, by the Iranians. And what we have to do is recognize that this is just the beginning. He came in there, he said he was going to fight ISIS. That wasn't his ideal. He really wanted to fight al-Nusra, al-Jilani, that whole group, anybody who was against Assad. We should be able to see that now. So we need to oppose him. When his general came along and said, you guys cannot fly in this area, we should have said, not only are we going to fly in this area, but you go take a flying leap. And we should establish a no-fly zone along the Turkish border. And we need to challenge him everywhere in the world. We need to challenge him in the whole Baltic basin, not just the Baltic states. We need to reestablish missile defense. We need to have more than 1 or 2 armored brigades that we float around in the area. We need to give weapons to Ukraine because they got rid of their nuclear supply on the promise that we would protect them if they were invaded. We have to get in his face. We have to understand that his weakness is an economic weakness. And we have strength in some areas where he has weakness. We need to get rid of our energy exportation rules. We need to export natural gas, which we can liquefy now, make Europe dependent on us so that we can decrease his influence. In other words, we must be proactive. We can't sit around and just wait.
One final political question. I know you got to run. You're almost in every national poll, state key state polls, number 2, right behind the front runner, Donald Trump. I said that at the beginning
Sure.
of this interview. What are you going to do to become the front runner in the Republican race for the White House?
Well, you know, I don't think like a normal politician because I'm not a politician. And I just think in terms of continuing to get my message out there, helping people to see who I am as opposed to who some of the media says I am, and they will make the appropriate decision.
You like Donald Trump?
Yes, absolutely.
Because he said you were just an okay doctor. And we know you weren't just an okay doctor.
It's okay. You know, I told him he was an okay doctor too.
The book is entitled A More Perfect Union, What We the People Can Do to Reclaim Our Constitutional Liberties. It's already a bestseller. I'm sure it's going to be a #1 bestseller at some point.
Thank you, Wilf. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Dr. Ben Carson, thanks very much for joining us.